Unapologetically Like Us Conversations, where we talk about anything and everything. No regrets, no remorse. Are you ready? Because we are.
Now.
Okay, do y'all drink wine on this podcast?
Yes,
You can do whatever you like on this podcast.
Have your sip.
Okay. So I want to say welcome to another episode of Unapologetically Like Us. Tonight, me and Tiyanna are going to be talking to Dr. LaToya Williams. We are talking about stages of life and her profession. She is a forensic psychologist, and I think that's very exciting. I'm not sure what it means. That's why she's on, so she can teach us some things.
I'm so mad at you.
I'm just saying, I don't exactly know.
Okay.
It's not like
Please,
gynecology
give
and
us like a quick breakdown, like a quick elevator pitch on what it is that we.
All right. So it's a really big title for a lot of different kinds of jobs, but basically it means that you're a psychologist who works with the court system, with the justice system in some form of a way. Mm-hmm. So your job is about assessing someone's risk most of the times. In the criminal setting, it's about assessing someone's risk to reoffend or to commit another crime. In the civil court system, is usually about assessing the likelihood that someone could act out in a civil way. So civil stuff will be more like family court and child custody cases. So a lot of times they're assessing who the most appropriate parent is based on personality. Mm-hmm. And in a criminal justice system, it would be assessing a lot of different personality traits to see who's most likely at risk of committing another crime. So I do more criminal stuff than civil stuff. And primarily I do profiling of sex offenders. Yeah. So if you watch, there's a show that comes on, Law and Order SVU.
Yeah.
Yes. So love it.
Yeah. So one of my clients told me I was the Asian guy on.
Oh, I get it.
I don't really watch those kinds of shows. So
I watch that all the time.
Yeah, one of the clients said I'm the Asian guy on the show. So if he profiles sex offenders and gives them an idea of what sex offending traits are clustering together, what the person's personality style is like, when they're most likely to go out and reoffend, what's making them offend, that's what I do.
Wow.
And so in every case, are your services, acquired for every case? Is that standard, especially speaking on, the criminal cases specifically?
No, it's not required for every case. First, not every case is a case as far as the court system is concerned, as far as the prosecutor is concerned, as far as the defense attorney is concerned. Not every case is a case that warrants for a forensic psychologist to come aboard, because that comes with a fee. And not all states have the money to hire a forensic psychologist to work for them. Not all jurisdictions have the money. And then even in terms of family, not all families have the money. So it's not always looking at traits to see the likelihood that someone is at high risk of reoffending. Sometimes people are looking for you to come in and do assessments to say this person basically doesn't have the personality traits to offend.
Is that typically when families come into play? Is when they want you to say they don't?
Yeah, it's usually when they are really passionate that the person is innocent and is being wrongfully convicted. Then I'll get a lot of phone calls from family members saying, "Hey, we really believe our brother or our father. We think the system is railroading him. Can you come aboard and help out in some kind of way?"
Okay. When you do that, have you, I'm sure you have, but what happens when you say, no, I think they have these traits?
They don't believe me, and then they move on to finding another forensic psychologist.
Okay.
Yeah, more often than not, that's usually my answer. And if I could tell right off the bat that based on what I'm hearing in the story, that it's looking sketchy, I'll usually just say right up front, I can't take this case. And so then they'll move on and they'll look for someone else. Yeah, I told, so I don't always work with sex offenders. At this post-COVID, I'm picking up a lot of different cases. I primarily am doing risk assessments for sex offenders, but I can do them for any type of case. So like on yesterday, I turned down a case that wasn't relating to sex offending, but it was a mother's child abuse case. So the mother was convicted of child abuse and she was trying to get her kids back. And just from the phone call, it wasn't jiving well with me. I was already hearing a lot of red flags. So I just told her I couldn't work with her. And she was offended by it.
Of course she was, because she wasn't going to get away.
Yeah, she was offended by it. But I was like, I'm not going to be able to do it, so you'll have to find someone else. A couple of weeks ago, I turned down a case. That one was a sex offending case, but it was, the perpetrator had already been convicted. His co-defendant was a female, and her attorney wanted me to come in and to basically tie in who she was as a person in terms of her personality traits and talk about how she had been groomed by the guy who actually committed the offenses. I did not turn down that case because I did believe that she was groomed, but for the backlash that I was going to catch from the community, the clients pay for the amount of work that I'm going to have to do. So for the amount of backlash that I was going to get from the community, the amount of times that I was going to have to show up in court, the amount of times that I was going to have to sit in front of someone and have to explain this case that a lot of people weren't going to want to support. I added up all those hours and I gave her a number, and that figure was a really high figure that I don't think she could afford. And I don't think her attorney would have gone into her trust to pay for, because it was a big number.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you decided to do what you do, how did you get into, what made you say, oh, I'm gonna go do this?
Well, so I think this is a walk throughout my history. I kind of landed here. I went to school for pre-med biology. Didn't like it very much. Did like my psych classes. Like the criminal justice classes, was helping my friend with her homework, and just decided to change majors and do psychology and criminal justice. And at the time, I didn't know what I was going to do with them. At the time, people kept telling me this didn't make sense because I was going to have one degree that I never used. But I stuck with it. And at some point, the concept of forensics started to develop. And then schools started to create a program as I was coming out of college. It was 9 schools in the country that had a forensic program. So I applied to all 9 schools, and it took off from there, you know.
So what interests you about it? What is it that's, you know, you go, because I don't know, I would be kind of scared myself, but, and I think I might have mentioned that before, but it's a whole lot, it's like with me and dealing with drug addicts, it's a whole lot of, you got to stay a step ahead because they're always trying to outsmart you. And that's just draining and tiring.
It is. It's very draining and it's very tiring. So when I'm doing the consultations, so I'll do consultations for other people that are trying to break into the field. The degree doesn't get you into the field. Most people with forensic psych degrees don't use them. It's hard to break in, and it's good money once you're in, but the money is limited because you really got to connect to a state that has the money.
Right.
And you got to connect to a state that wants to pay for the service. So you got to be around people that want to pay for the service. So I do consultations on how to break in. And one of the things that I emphasize with people is they have to have a backup job. Because there are times when I've had to just not work for a couple of months because it was too much. It was either too many cases, or I got a case that was a really, really bad case that freaked me out. And you got to be able to take a step back, and being able to take a step back and pay your bills means that you have to have something else that you can do on the side. So that's kind of how I handle it when I'm getting overwhelmed, when I feel like it's too much, when I've heard too many stories. Then I prepare myself to take a step back, and I either live off my savings, which is not a good way to go about it, or I find something else to do in the meantime.
Right.
Now, when it comes to your work, because you mentioned how you just have to develop these relationships with states, and hopefully it's obviously with the state that has the funds to be able to afford your services. In terms of finding and developing those relationships, is that just completely on you as the licensed individual to kind of go and shop around state to state, or talk to different attorneys from multiple states to figure out the information?
Yep. You have to market yourself. So I'm constantly marketing myself. I'm constantly writing things on Facebook, putting stuff on Twitter, putting stuff on Instagram, putting stuff on LinkedIn, sending my Vita in the mail to different law offices, knocking on the doors of different law offices. Yeah, it's you gotta do it. Like, I'm constantly paying for stuff with the goal of trying to get money. So I'll go to the state of Minnesota and do a training, like doing FBI training, just because that puts me in the room with people and I can pass out my business card.
Right. Right.
It might not even be a training that I need. It might be something that I already know a whole lot about and can get up there and can teach that training or facilitate that training in my sleep. But if it gets me in the room with the right people, that's the goal.
Now,
so when you
Grace, go ahead.
Do you have to be licensed in other states or no?
You do, based on that state. And it depends on how long you're going to be there. For the most part, with the assessments, for example, like a sex offender treatment assessment, it doesn't take very long. It's a 4-hour assessment. So I can go to that state and get in and out in a matter of 4 hours. And so it's not a big deal. But if it's a case that's going to keep me there, and it's going to keep me there for a certain amount of time, then I can apply for like temporary licenses in different states. And then you get granted, a lot of times they last like 30 days to 90 days. And that gives you enough time to get it done and get out. You don't usually have to be licensed if you're just there for a short period of time. So if I'm just there for the weekend, no one cares about that. But if I'm there and it's like, okay, you've clearly moved here and you're working here a little bit more than a few days, then they want you to do something.
Okay.
Do you at all feel like the realities of your profession and working within your profession were properly or even just honestly communicated to you when you were a student? Because oftentimes I feel like talking to people in healthcare, a lot of people I know would say that the realities of having a profession in healthcare was not honestly communicated to them while they were students, and they probably would have made different adjustments or different decisions. So do you feel like you were properly prepared for this field and what it entails actually working within it?
Yeah, I have to say that I was. Most of the times when I would articulate what I wanted in terms of my career, when I would say, my goal is to open up a private forensic practice and I want to get state contracts, which I have. In Wisconsin, I have 2 state contracts. My advisors would look at me weird because they thought that was strange. It was unheard of at the time. And it's what I do now. So I was prepared because most of the commentary that I got was, you're being unrealistic, that doesn't make sense. At best, you need to be prepared to just bounce around and move around, and you're never going to have enough work in forensics to actually be able to sustain your lifestyle. So you're not going to just do forensics. You're going to do some other stuff, which still worked out, by the way, because I ended up really doing a lot of neuropsychology stuff. So I'm a neuropsychologist too.
Wow.
So I did that because I was like, well, I'm not really going to be able to do a whole lot of forensic work because that work is going to be rare. There's not going to be enough court systems that will allow me in. But it turned out to be the opposite, in that I actually ended up getting way more forensic work and doing very little neuropsych work.
When your population of clients, are they a variety? Is it more one than the other? Give a little example of that.
Primarily when people start wanting to pay you to do these kind of assessments, it's for the bigger cases. So primarily I work with, in Wisconsin, they're called Chapter 980. So every state has a different statute with a different number. But in Wisconsin, it's called Chapter 980. And essentially, those are the people who they've been determined to be too violent to let out into the community. So what happens is they go to prison, they serve their prison sentence, and then they're civilly committed under the Chapter 980 statute, which means they're then taken to another facility and housed there because they're too dangerous to let out in the community. That's primarily what I work with up here. So I'll do some assessing to see when their risk levels elevate, to see when their risk levels go down, and then I'll do that assessment from week to week. And I also do treatment to try to undo some of the things that have happened that have led them to turn out to be who they are. So after,
Go ahead.
So after that, then that's primarily what I do. So that's primarily the population that I'm working with. But clustered around that, I get court cases or cases where people are headed into court, and prosecutors will say, hey, can you assess this person? So we know what we want to do with this person in regards to sentencing. We want to know if this person can just be placed on probation, or if this is someone that has to go to prison. And if they go to prison, what should happen once they go to prison in terms of rehabilitation? Where is it best for them to go versus where they shouldn't go?
Okay.
Those cases are usually not as pathological as what I'm usually working with. Those cases are usually a walk in the park for me, though.
Okay. Tiyanna, you had a question?
Yeah, on average, how, if you just had to guess or throw a number out there, on average, how many manpower hours are we talking about per standard case? So nothing too intricate, nothing too easy, but right down the middle. What's the average of the amount of hours that you spend working and preparing for one case?
Not very many. It's good money. So on average, if we're just talking about not a low level case like the guy was 18 around with somebody 16, or not a high case like this person is very predatory and violent and has like 60 victims. In the middle would be probably the standard. The guy went out and raped somebody, the standard pedophile. And in terms of hours, I would say I'm usually in front of the person for about 4 to 6 hours.
Wow.
To score the assessment tools. At this point, I really know the assessment tools really well, so that doesn't take me a whole lot of time. But it'll probably take me like a couple of hours to score the assessment tools. And then to pull it all together, like to write up my report, where I'm pulling in all the information and I'm making a case for why I think what I think. And I'm making the numbers make sense in terms of the stats. So because the assessment tools render an actual statistic on the likelihood that the person will commit the crime again and within a certain time frame. So when I get finished explaining the numbers and explaining the time frame and just pulling everything together and saying, here's what's going to trigger this person, here's what's going to make it more likely that they reoffend, here are the things that they got to work on. That report probably will take me another maybe 6 hours to write.
Wow.
So 6 hours to write it up, a couple of hours to score, 4 to 6 hours in front of the person. On average, about 12 hours.
Wow.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
So when you do this, and you score, do they ask you to keep monitoring these people?
It depends on what the situation is. If this is a case that I took to continue to monitor the person, yes. If this was just me coming in to write that report, no.
But
Okay.
you know going in that you may have to. They tell you up front, we want you to do a assessment and then follow them
I
during
know.
their time, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know all the ins and out of the situation before I take the situation.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. And do you ever, because for some reason what's coming to my head are those cases that, again, pulling from Law and Order SVU, but pulling from that show as a reference, I think about these cases that come to mind where you have someone who's committed a crime, a heinous crime at that. And in order to try their best to get a lighter sentence, declare some sort of mental illness. And so in cases like that, have you, in your experience, encountered someone who legally was trying to say that they were not in the correct mental state to commit the crime that they did? Have you ever encountered someone who said that but was false, was lying?
Yeah. It happens all the time.
I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to deliver the news like, nah, you are just fine.
That's not what that is. Yeah, it works. It's kind of tricky. It's very tricky. And part of the reason why it's tricky is because at different stages that can backfire for them. Depending on who they are, depending on the state that they're in, it could totally backfire. So usually, so let's just say not guilty by reason of insanity.
Yes.
That's a defense. And then guilty but mentally ill is a defense. In a lot of states, that label by itself is just worse than even going to prison.
Really?
You end up spending more time in a mental hospital over that defense. And that's why you don't see it very often. They have it a lot on TV.
Yeah.
Right.
Out in the regular world, how often have you heard someone get off for not guilty by reason of insanity or got off because they were found guilty but mentally ill?
Right.
You've never heard that, but you've seen a lot of people go to prison that clearly had mental health issues.
Yes.
It's a very poor defense, and typically it's a questionable defense. I worked a case, it was a murder case last year. It was a murder case, and I worked that case, and the attorney was going that route. And I just kept thinking, damn, this attorney is dumb. Like, it typically does not work out well for the person. Like, it typically doesn't. And it didn't work out well for this particular person. So it's just not a good case. It's not a good plea to go for. Now, what you will see though is people with sex offenses who don't know any better will come in and they will try to go that route. Their attorney will usually talk them out of it because it doesn't work out very well. But they may keep pushing the issue after they've been sentenced and once they've been taken to prison because they're trying to have an easier way to do the time that they got. So if they want to spend that time like on a special unit that's for people who have mental health issues and they feel like it's cushier and they can get psychotropic meds that they can get high on, then they'll go that route. So when I first started, like I was an intern. And I had a case where the person did that. The person committed their crime in Cali, then came to Wisconsin, committed some crimes, Wisconsin took over the case from Cali. But while the person was in Cali, he did convince them that he had a severe and persistent mental illness. And so he came here, committed some crimes. Wisconsin took over the case. Wisconsin didn't give him like a not guilty by reason of insanity plea. Sent him to Tennessee. He did his prison sentence in Tennessee. For a long time of it, he convinced the staff down there that he had a mental illness, though. So he had a cushier ride where he pretty much spent the bulk of his prison sentence high. He then came back to Wisconsin because he's approaching the end of his sentence. And so again, here we have what's called Chapter 980, and it means you get to the end of your sentence. And if you're too violent, they say, well, we're going to go for civil commitment. So they went for civil commitment. And this is where I step in, and I'm new. I'm an intern. And he's totally liking that I'm an intern because he just feels like he is just going to totally snow me. He had an evaluation done by one of Wisconsin's more well-known evaluators, and that person determined that he had a mental illness also. And then I came in and I basically said, no, he doesn't, and wrote this report, like just chopping everything up, like just going throughout his whole history, going through what took place in Cali with Cali's court system, what happened here, what took place down in Tennessee. And as I'm pulling all this stuff together, it was very, very clear that he didn't have one. And so then he was civilly committed here. And basically he's one of the people who I'm like, if he ever escapes, he's gonna probably come try to hurt me.
Wow. See, that's why I don't understand how you do that. And because to me, I would be looking over my shoulder, over my back. I'd probably be hiding under my bed all the time.
They're under a lot of restrictions, though. It would be really difficult, especially for that particular population, because they're under a lot. It wouldn't be the easiest thing for them to get out.
Yeah. It's still high profile work, just like the attorneys that I'm sure you're working with on these cases. I'm sure these are some of the cases that keep them up at night, just like you, in terms of, in the back of their heads, like, while I'm happy that we have snatched this person off the streets. Yes, in the back of my head, I think about that too. I'm sure it's tough work that you guys do, but, as a lay member of the community, we are very, very much appreciative of people like you taking the time and the space to do that.
Anything that has to do with mental health, I'm so happy somebody else does it.
Yes.
Because it's just not, I can't get my head around how to even do it. It's just a lot of work. I'd rather deal with my other medical side than that side. So I give kudos to anybody doing that.
Yeah.
I remember that case being one that my mother said kept her up awake at night. Like she didn't like it. She didn't like the case. She wanted to know where I was meeting with the guy at, how far was I sitting away from the guy? Right. What is it? Was it an officer standing in the room with me? How far away? And she told me later that was a case that kept her up at night as well.
So when you are seeing people, do you have protection in like close to you, right outside the door? You know how me and Tiyanna like SVU, they have an officer standing at the door all the time listening and waiting.
Not always. It depends. It depends. I hate to answer this question because I think the answer that I'm about to give is going to sound silly. But like I don't know, you don't really go into it thinking, well, this person is going to hurt me. Though you know they could. Like, so a common saying in forensics is we go to work not knowing if we're going to go home.
Right.
And so though I keep that in mind, you don't always go into it feeling like you gotta suit up either. So I don't always go into it feeling like I gotta have a walkie-talkie on. I gotta have an alarm around my neck. Most of the times I don't, because I don't like all that stuff.
I would like it better if you started
my
doing that
answer
sort of
is
thing.
going to sound silly, but I don't want to be responsible for state property. So I typically don't use all that stuff. That's why I said in my answer is going to sound really silly. But most people don't. Like, most people don't suit up. And most of the times you are safe. Like, you very seldom hear about that person that got hurt. Though you hear the stories, you very seldom hear about somebody getting hurt.
Right.
And I've not been attacked. If I were attacked, I have my voice. So I'm never in a building by myself. I know how to scream. I'm usually surrounded by a bunch of agents, offices. But there's usually nobody standing right outside my door.
Okay.
And then, like everything else, you be prepared to fight. So I try to keep myself in shape. I try to make sure I'm hitting on that punching bag. I keep my mace next to me. I keep a taser. Depending on who the person is, I keep a taser somewhere close to.
Wow.
Yeah. And depending on where I'm at, so I don't, a lot of, I see people in different places, but in terms of, if I'm down at like the state building or something, then no, I don't have nothing. It's like 4 different kinds of law enforcement in that building. But if I'm at my own office, then I'm suited up. I usually have my belly band on. I got my gun on one side. I got my taser on the other side. I'm locked and loaded and ready to go. So you play it based on the situation.
So that leads me to ask you about so the guy who killed the spa people and his bad day that he was having. What do you think is going to, what would you say his lawyers are going to say? That he just had a bad day, he didn't really mean it, he is mentally unstable, what?
Yeah, it's a high profile cases. It's a high profile case, and because of that, I anticipate that not guilty by reason of insanity at some point is going to hit the newspaper because that's entertaining. Whether they actually go with it or not is something different. But they're going to pull it in even if they don't take it there as a plea. Their goal is going to be able to say he wasn't in his right mind. His thoughts was disorganized in some kind of way. He wasn't able to be rational. And that's how this crime took place.
And so for a case like that, using that one as an example, for instance, do they, whether it's prosecutors or defense, do they bring you in immediately once that criminal is apprehended? Like, going in to get assessment like within the first day, the first 48 hours?
No, they don't bring you in right away, unless that's also entertainment.
Okay.
Yeah. So the thing about cases that end up on the news is a lot of what happens actually does happen for the sake of keeping up appearances for the community.
Wow.
It may not be legit how things are going to go. It's just what's going to look good for the community. What's going to make it look like the court system is doing everything that they can do to be fair. But probably not. Chances are what happened was they took him into custody. He went to the county jail. They did an initial intake assessment for mental health. It was something quick. It was something rapid. It might have been done in 15 minutes to an hour. So nothing real. And then they filed it and they made a determination on how they was going to classify him mental health wise and what assistance they was going to give him. So if they was going to put him on the caseload of a correctional psychologist and that correctional psychologist does check-ins, that was all it was really going to be. Or if they was going to go ahead and give him some medication, then they put him on a caseload of a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist gives him some meds, but it's not going to be anything special around it. A forensic psychologist wouldn't get called in until people started planning. So if he gets a paid attorney, that paid attorney is going to find someone right away. And that paid attorney is going to say, here's my defense. I want you to do an assessment to see if I have any form of a defense here. And then a person to get to work. Then the prosecutor will say, well, we want to get our own forensic evaluator. And we want to see what we can find that's going to help with our case. And then that's what they do. And usually you end up in court with two forensic evaluators that are either saying the same thing or they're saying something different. Depending on the state that you're in, that may be common that they tend to say something different because some forensic evaluators, they're quote unquote hired guns. They come aboard and they say whatever, which side wants them to say. And then the jury figures it out. They pick a side. Some states where it goes that way. I used to work in Illinois, and I would do a lot of risk assessments in Illinois. And one of the things that I really liked about being there is every time I was asked to do an assessment, it was by a judge. It was never by either side. Because the judge was like, I need to know what's going on.
Right.
And so I would come in, and it was very unbiased that way. But you move from state to state and things can look very different. You can move from county to county and things look very different. And here in Wisconsin, you can get a call from either one. And I usually get a call from either one, prosecutor or defense. I've never gotten a call from a judge here. So I usually decide whether I'm going to take a case based on whether I believe in it. So I'm not anti-defense and I'm not anti-prosecution. For me, it's more of drop the discovery in my lap, let me read it, and then I assess for myself what's going on, and then I choose which case I believe in.
Wow.
I know. That sounds like a lot of. So tell us what you do, because we're going to start wrapping up. so that everybody, it's kind of late where you are. So
No, yeah.
what do you do to not, to keep this going and going in your head?
Yeah.
How do you bring it back down and de-escalate?
Exactly.
It's a skill. Like with everybody else's job, you gotta learn to let things go. So I compartmentalize a lot. When I am at work, I'm at work. When I'm at home, I'm at home. COVID was pretty rough because the office shut down for 4 months. So I had to really hit the ground running and get back on track. So I was bringing a lot of work home. But this month has been all about getting back to that place where I work 8 hours a day. I try not to work more than 4 days a week. So I don't know if you remember, Grace, but like pre-COVID, I was only working 2 days a week.
Right.
So, I mean, there was a lot. I was making really, really good money and really charging people based on, again, remember I said I charge based on how much backlash I'm going to get, how stressful is this case going to be for me.
Right.
So that 8 to 12 hours that it takes me to work one case and write up one report can be really lucrative. And I was only working 2 days a week at the time. So I would leave. I was traveling a lot, leaving Wisconsin, hopping on a plane every Thursday morning, not coming back until Monday, was going in and out of the country and was going to see family a lot and a lot of spa days. And then COVID happened and the practice shut down for 4 months. And then it was almost like starting the practice all over again. So I finally gotten back to the place where I'm working not as much. At one point, I was working every day and I was working like 12 hours a day. But now I'm off on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. I'm only doing Monday through Thursday. Monday through Wednesday is when I'm gonna see people. Thursdays is geared more towards report writing. I am now charging attorneys a rush fee, which I had stopped the rush fee in order to rebuild the clientele again. So I'm now back to that, which means that if they want to report back in less than a month, I charge them an extra $500 for it. And so I'm organizing things again. I'm organizing things in a way where I'm not so overwhelmed. I'm only doing one assessment a week. On those other days, I'm doing smaller kinds of jobs. So I might be doing treatment on those other days, psychoeducation on those other days, consultations, mentorship on those other days. But I'm only doing one assessment a week now. And I write it up on Thursday.
That's really good. It's a struggle to find the balance, especially for a lot of us right now coming out of, I mean, I don't even know you could say coming out of, but maybe entering this different phase of the pandemic. Right. Everyone's trying to find what the new normal and what the balance is between not trying to blur the lines between work and home, especially like you just mentioned, Dr. Williams, about us, for a lot of people having jobs where now you're working from home. Well, now it's like, okay, well, when are my office hours versus my home hours? Because now everything's in one spot, right? So it's so easy to just roll over in the bed at, 6 a.m. or whatever and answer an email. It's like now all of a sudden people think they can get a hold of you at 6 a.m. all the time. And it's like, where, traditionally when we had to leave the house to go to a physical office, it was really clear what the boundaries were between work hours and your personal time. So I commend you for getting that together. And just know we're all struggling and we're all in that boat.
Right. Well, we thank you so very much. It was very informative. And, you know, I'm not going to ask you all the information like we typically ask, because your job is just different that way. And so we're not trying to put that out there. But we will.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I guess, Grace, the better question would be to ask her. I mean, you said you do mentorship. If someone is interested in learning more about the profession and possibly being mentored by you, or if you offer consultation services, how can we get a hold of you for business purposes?
Oh, yeah. First, they can Google me. If they Google my name, Dr. LaToya K. Williams, I pop up.
Okay.
Yep, I pop up. So it's not that hard. What I will say is, if they want access to my email and if they want access to my phone number, the easiest way to get that is to go on LinkedIn.
Okay.
And put my name in. It's all there. So there is a lot of information that's hidden, but stuff related to the office isn't.
Okay.
Yeah, stuff that's related to the office isn't. Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. So then, you know, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, they want to ask you, so I'm interested in this and how do I do it? Then that's a good way to get in touch with you through LinkedIn.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good.
We really appreciate your time.
You're welcome, y'all.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.